Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Motor City Mad Mouth Show. My name is Scott Morganroth, your host. Glad to have you with us tonight. And tonight's show is going to be old school media versus new school media. Ever heard of this book? Been talking about it for a while. Lessons on the Microphone, tuning into the enduring wisdom of visionary leaders. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and a whole lot more. So this is where part of this is going to come out of tonight for sure. So with that said, I want to welcome my longtime colleague George Eichorn to the broadcast. George, glad to have you on.
Pleasure's all mine. I'm excited about this. It's a great show you got here, Scott. So I'm ready to go, man. We've been knowing each other for a long time.
Yeah, 40 plus years, my goodness, and it only gets better as we figure this insanity out. And yes, I have a great one-liner for all of you folks that are tuning in either now or later, depending on when you get the show, about new media. I'll get to that in a moment. So, a lot of this show, folks, is going to be a lot of it's going to be based on what I wrote in the book, but the book goes into more detail. I'm going to go out there and do everything in my power to pretty much give you a little bit of a snapshot of what we're doing. So George and I got started together in 1979 when we began working together with Ron Cameron at WXYZ Radio, which happened to be ABC at the time. And you talk about high pressure network, that's what we were dealing with. We're dealing with FCC regulations. You don't follow those, George, we're in deep trouble. So, it's
For
it's just
sure.
it's just kind of how it is, man. So, I'm going to talk, let's talk about our working relationship with the late Ron Cameron. This guy here had a good heart. He was just outright loud, rude, but I guess we both can truly say that he gave us our first break anyways, and rest in peace, Ron.
Yeah, he did quite a number of years ago, like you said, back at 79 and Broadcast House. I love the name of the studio where we worked at, the Broadcast House. What a great name for both the radio and the television, of course, ABC owned and operated. Yeah, Ron was something else. He's a character. He's a one of a kind of guy. One of the most important things, as you know, Scott, back then, not only for us to screen the callers, but also to help arrange for some big name guests on that show. And
Right.
I'll say one thing about Ron. I mean, he had a little notebook and a phone directory, if you will, the old school, and wrote all these numbers down. But boy, oh boy, we delivered, you and I as producers over the years, and that was the name of the game. We had to get top name guests. That's what he demanded. That's what the station demanded, and we came through.
Yeah, and there were times when we didn't get as many calls, but we found a way to keep the lines rolling anyways. I'm not going to get into specific details. The show isn't about that particular opportunity. And I got that opportunity through my dad's employee over at All Pro Sporting Goods, a guy by the name of Sam Greenblatt. Rest in peace, Sam. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have a book as well. And by the way, incidentally, George Eichorn wrote the foreword for the book. But, again, when we talk about how things were back then, and I'm going to get into new media shortly. Okay, that was just what we had. We were under all kinds of pressure to deliver in many ways, but I think as newbies to the business, we realized that, hey, you know what? Not everybody gets in the doors over a broadcast house. When you're a member of the media, you have to respect the wishes of Marshall McLuhan, who coined the phrase, the medium is the message. And that's something I've always lived and died by, in terms of the Bible of one-liners with Marshall McLuhan. I learned that in college and have carried it through for 4 decades. So I'm sure you probably always felt that way as well, didn't you?
Oh yeah, Scott. And you mentioned about that broadcast house, and think about it. Our viewers and listeners tonight. We were right in the hub. We were right there when the wire, we had to get the wire copy off the ticker tape, if you will,
Right.
finding your stories. I mean, you talk about old school, man. You were looking for anything you can get over there that came across the wire. As we know, it was called Associated Press, UPI,
Mhm.
and we were right by the newsroom there. We were by all the other talk show hosts. I mean, yeah, we were live, and you had to get it right, and you can screw around, like you said, with FCC and ABC, regulations.
Yeah, I'm gonna get to those sources in a few minutes. I'm
Sure.
glad you brought it up, but George kind of wet everybody's whistle about what are all these things. Well, I'm going to tell you one thing though. what I did enjoy doing, and again, being new, is I had an opportunity to do a remote with Dick Night Train Lane over at the state fairgrounds where I was screening callers. I had a producer there, and then I was over on site at the state fairgrounds, and then got all the callers over to Dick, and it was pretty interesting. And what was so interesting about that whole thing, though, was for me, doing a remote with a Lions Hall of Famer. And when we were there for the NFL draft, I'll never forget going at the corner ballpark and I saw Dick Night Train Lane's thing. I had to get a picture of that at least because camera phones, who would have ever thought that, let alone mobile phones?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I was able to get that done. But that was a great thrill catching up with Night Train Lane. Again, I was like, I wasn't very old, like 16, 17 anyways,
yeah,
when I
yeah.
started doing it. But I think the one show, I shouldn't say think, I know the one show that stands out to me was when Ron wasn't there and I worked with Mike Berry. And you want to
Yeah.
talk about one of the nicest guys I have ever met in this business. Mike Berry is it. Let me paint the picture, folks. We were supposed to have Jack the Assassin Tatum on our show.
Oh
But
yeah.
guess what? Jack didn't show up. Okay, why? Well, remember he paralyzed Daryl Stingley, and his career was ended pretty quickly. And I know that Jack obviously, picked and chose his spots is what he did. So, as far as I'm concerned, you know, Mike and I, we did what we had to do. So Mike says to me right between the headphones, "What do you want to do?" Don't worry about it. What we're going to do is I'm going to take Tatum's segment and I'm going to go open line with it, is what I told him. I said, okay, well, it doesn't matter to me. I mean, you're the one directing traffic. Here I am, 17 years old, okay,
Yeah.
directing traffic for ABC Radio. And for a lot of people that don't realize, Detroit being a very big major sports town, with undoubtedly one of the best sports talk shows out there because there weren't as many then. Back then, you didn't have a lot of the all sports stations as you did. People depended on us, especially in Metro Detroit. But Mike was great, George. I swear. This guy was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know what? He says to me, Scott, I really enjoyed working with you. You were as cool as can be. I said, come on, Mike. The show's got to go on. We're going to do what we're going to do. These are passionate fans here. And, he says, anytime I would work with you all day long, the way you kept it composure. So, I asked Mike, let me ask you a question. Did you get paid for the show? Yeah, I got my money. You got nothing to worry about. All we had to do is get through it. What did I get out of that exchange? Give me a hug and a shake of the hand. No problem. But again, I remember he was. Now, if Ron Cameron had been doing it and Tatum didn't show up, he would have gone nuts.
Oh yeah.
He
Oh
would have.
gosh.
He would have
Yeah.
gone ballistic.
Yeah.
And I had my run-ins with Cameron too. I really, really did. But you know what? Once you decided to leave the position, okay, then I told Cameron, you sent George out the door, but you treat me like him, I'll bury your backside, and I can yell louder than you, and I'm a lot younger. And
Yeah.
I said if I
Yeah.
were you, I wouldn't try to test my. George Eichorn's a nice guy. Even at 17, I was brash, and I told Ron, "Don't cross the line, or life's going to get tough." And I'll start going to the bosses and let everybody know that this guy needs to tone it down or do something about him, get a tranquilizer or whatever. But he
He was
never.
something.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
he
he was
was
something else. Yeah, but getting back to your Mike Berry story, again, a great situation because Mike was doing the sports downstairs for Channel Seven Television,
right.
and like you said, we needed another host, and Mike was available. But yeah, first class guy all the way. Really top notch sports broadcast, top notch person. That's a great story and a great reminder of what a great time it was for you personally to work with him.
Yeah, at that time, I was just only a few weeks into the business. I got hit with you decided I had nothing. Everything fell on my lap. I said,
Yeah,
I'm just
yeah,
trying to get my feet wet on this deal. But you know what? I enjoyed that. That's okay because I learned a lot. It set a lot of the values of what it was like to be behind the scenes. And I think anybody that gets into business should start behind the scenes and work your way to the mic. I'll get to that in a little bit.
yeah,
But the thing that you and I did is, in addition to what we did at WXYZ, we had the Detroit Monitor, and we did a lot of writing. And I think the main thing that I've always told a lot of young journalists is you got to be able to write before you go on the air. You need to have a command of the English language. And I'll never
Yeah.
forget the time I put you on the spot 9 million times, but I'll never forget when you asked me, myself, and a bunch of other people to write a few paragraphs, and then you put them in. And I happen to have a creative writing teacher who wants everybody to get published. So I sat there and once you're a man of your word. And folks, this is the reason why George and I are great friends and colleagues. Is a man proved me he was a man of his word, and that's one of the core values that I really do my best to try to possess. Is what I try to do.
Yeah.
So,
Thank
but
you.
that's it. Oh, you're welcome. But the
Yeah.
main thing that we all have to understand is not only being a man of your word, you have to be able to write well, and then by the time you get on the air, you'll find that it's much easier. I can give you many, many examples, but the
Oh
two
yeah,
are
yeah. And you know what, Scott? I can still remember the day, even before I met you, how important it meant to, like you said, to get published, to get writing. I would send a letter to the editor. I would send a letter to the Sporting News if I didn't like something. And to make to get my name out there too. I mean, when I was kind of your age at that time, 17,
right,
18, whatever, I did those kind of things too because I knew that those were going to be important for you and me trying to make a career out of this is
right.
to get your name, like you said, out there, get published, but more important than anything, get published and write well, write good, because you need that, like you said, in sports or news, any of the on-air stuff.
Well, it only took me two things to get controversial. I live now. I don't even care. But when I wrote an article on there, don't boycott Olympics, you didn't agree with us. I don't care if you agree with it. Do it anyways. I got graded down from that paper from an A to an A minus by my instructor, Miss Ann Nozeski. But you know what, though? Because she had an opinion. So I walked up to her and said, I really don't frankly care about your opinion. This is what I think. Deal with it. So as soon as I told you, get that thing published. I have a point to prove. So you did. And then what I did, and this does happen to be in the book, by the way, and I took that copy and slammed it right on her desk. If that doesn't get this woman's attention, I don't know what will.
Yeah,
She looked
right.
at me like I had the eye of the tiger. I didn't need Sylvester Stallone to do it. I said, "Look at this!"
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
And then
yeah,
her eyes lit up like a Christmas tree. I mean, she was a nice lady. I really
yeah,
liked her a lot. She liked me. I was brash. But when I slammed that thing there and she looked at it and said, "You want me to get anything else, Bubba?" No, you're proving your point. Because if you do, I have another sword now. All right, we're good.
yeah,
I
yeah.
wasn't getting graded down because of the fact that I was going to get published. You want to find a way, but you're not doing it that way. All right, so let's go ahead back to the FCC. Okay. But the main thing about the FCC is you don't mess around with them or you're going to get subjected to fines. So,
Absolutely, yeah. The Federal Communications Commission, they're like the guardians of the communications system in America as far as radio, television, and what goes over the airwaves. I mean, it was very important. We had to apply ourselves as individual broadcasters. We had to get our own license. It came in a little card, and then of course, you and I both probably ran out and laminated that card, but it was important because that card meant a lot and it meant the fact that we knew what we were doing. We knew about what should be on and what shouldn't be on if we're put into that
yeah.
situation. But yeah, the FCC, yeah, they had an iron fist, especially back then.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I always entrusted you to make sure I ended up getting my
Yeah,
FCC stuff, and you did. I mean, I didn't have to worry about that. You handle it, and I'll just show up and do what I got to do. And when you build a good relationship like we've been able to have over the years, that's what. Yeah, but I'll tell you one thing. To me, the FCC was something I enjoyed working with because it taught you to write clean and air clean. Make sure everything went
yes,
on there.
it
You're
sure
never going to
did.
let. Yeah, it did. It gives you discipline in terms of a lot of the good things. And anytime you have discipline with a lot of the good things that you happen to know, then
Yeah,
you know what? Nowadays, we're going to get to that in a little bit. It doesn't belong. So,
yeah,
all
for
right,
sure.
all right. We talked about news sources. Now we're going to get in more detail with it. Okay,
Yep.
we had the ticker, scores, great stuff, AP, UPI, and of course we had newspapers. So again, we were limited, and of course, I didn't start covering games, I don't think, until I got down to Florida, when I worked for the Hallandale Digest, the Tampa Tribune, and then when I returned back from school, you and I got hot and heavy with this stuff. I would
Right.
go as often as I could and made a boatload of connections. But my time in South Florida was great because that's when I ended up, work for the Hallandale Digest, Tampa Tribune, to name a couple. But when you're limited to the ticker, okay, the AP, the UPI, and the newspapers, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but
Yeah.
so that's what we had to go out there and deal with on a continuous basis. But you know what? You and
Absolutely.
I didn't even care. As long as there's a highlighter, I wrote some things down, reorganized, and all that. That
Hmm.
that's the main thing. So
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing that I think, our next step at the Sports Exchange with me and you and Phil Guastella, I think that's where, and I knew you're going to get there a little bit, but
right,
that was where, yeah, we had our own kind of system, like you said,
right,
of what should be highlighted, what should be read on the air. Ron Cameron didn't do too much of that. He might have read some headlines, but he devoured newspapers and he loved to read those sports sections. I know he did. And like you said, that's old
right,
school. That was old school, but that's what you
right,
had to do. You had to read, what did Jerry Green say? What did Joe Falls say? What
right,
did these guys, Ernie
right.
Harwell, say on the game last night, or whatever it was? Yeah, you had to make sure you were attuned to that.
Well, you and I do. We always thought the same way, anyways. And I always say, great minds think alike. To me, if you're not prepared, don't even show up. We
Yeah,
had an
yeah,
individual, a young guy, I won't mention the guy's name, who was so unprepared for a show that, and he kept thinking he did well, and he didn't last in our system. Because again, the main thing that you have to do is be prepared. Know what you have to do. You don't have to write a book there to prepare. You just have to focus
yeah.
on the key points. As well, one of the most interesting situations I happened to have occurred in Tampa. I wrote a story at where the Astros played Osceola County Stadium, and I
Mhm.
ended up talking to Lynn Henning about it later on down the line. And I was trying so hard with that computer that the Tribune, allowed me to borrow, obviously for the thing, where you had those rotary phones and you just stick them in there, those suction cups, and I had the story written in there, so it wasn't a big deal. But the problem was it was a brand new stadium. They didn't quite have the phone line down,
Oh,
and I'm
yeah.
covering the Florida State League All-Star games. So the guy that my editor at desk at the time, his name was Rick Nelson. Rest in peace, Rick. I said, Rick, I've done this 5 times. I don't know what to do, but the only thing, can I make one suggestion? Sure. Can we dictate this thing anyways? Because back then, I'm getting paid for every story. I had two at the time. We're talking about the old days. Yeah, you know what? I'll let you do that, but I need you to get a little bit of an extension of the deadline. He said, I'll take care of it. Just so you know what, and that's actually in my book. I
Yeah,
think I could have probably put one or two celebrity faces, but this is one thing that's a real lesson that people have to know. But you know what? I wasn't nervous. I just said, "Look, let's go ahead and I'll dictate it." And he did a phenomenal job putting it together. And he praised me when I got back. Said, "You know what I liked about what you did there? That you didn't crack under pressure. You didn't. You just went out there and stayed the course. We figure it out. Do what we got to do." And I'll tell you, I'm proud of that experience like I've never seen in my life. And again, a lot of what I learned at the Tampa Tribune was great. I was working for a daily newspaper, and what was so advantageous about the Hallandale Digest, excuse me, was the fact that for me, I ended up writing stories for them on a weekly basis and met across some big names like Muhammad Ali and a lot of other people like that
I
on the Florida.
remember. I remember. Yeah,
Yeah,
because you were so good at sending me copies of your columns. I know you were so proud, and you should be. And yeah, you had some great interviews, and you talked to a lot of people. So even though it was a smaller newspaper, just like my paper was smaller, the Monitor, Detroit Monitor, but we got the access to the big shots, to the big games, the big
yeah.
events, and that shows dedication and hard work.
Yeah, that was again. I am trying to get used to big time athletics and learning it as a youngster, but I think it was unbelievable. All right,
Yeah.
we're going to go back to the sports exchange a bit. I will actually, and we do this on a we the show is alive thanks to the two of us. But we ended up having a 6 hour show from 6 to midnight on Saturday. I got to tell you, I'm all about challenges. I really, really, really am. And I love that 6 hour show. We'd get to the studio at 3 o'clock, okay, prepared for 3 hours. And you and I kept digging for content, tapes, and all that. But
Yeah.
what are your thoughts about the way we were able to manage? I'm sure that the pizza companies did pretty well with us because that was the easiest thing to eat when we needed it. But how much did you enjoy the challenge like I did of producing a 6 to midnight show?
Oh, I did enjoy it. I mean, it was tremendous exposure, tremendous opportunity for you and me and Guastella and other people that contributed. But I tell you what, I mean, there were so many things so many components of that show. We made it into a magazine style format.
Right,
Because let's be honest, Saturday night you're not going to have the greatest audience listening. Okay, most people are out having dinner, or out on their boats, or whatever they're doing on Saturday night, watching a Hockey Night in Canada or whatever the heck it was. But
right,
we had the knowledge and the good sense to put in segments and to make those hourly clocks. We wrote out a piece of paper,
right. I
and
remember that.
like you said, I mean, we had to be creative because we knew that you just cannot have enough to say if you do it from scratch. I mean, you had to we had to plan that out. Those
Hmm.
hours of the show. Yeah.
Right. Well, and then you and I did is after that situation went away, we were smart, we were thrifty. We ended up going and doing Sundays from 9 to 11. Now, I love the idea of a 6 hour show, and I truly enjoyed it. But you know what's interesting about the Sunday situation from 9 to 11? Okay, was
Let's
the fact that to me, now we're catching people right before they go to bed and giving them update after update after update after update. And I tell you, I enjoyed it. And then what was nice about it is we all got to go out to the bar afterwards and talk about the show, what we could have done better.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And that was WCAR in
Right.
Garden City, Michigan. And the good thing, the fun thing too, I remember, because we were on after all the Sunday night football games,
Oh
not
yeah.
night, I'm sorry, Sunday football games,
Right.
the 4 o'clock games were all done. So we had like a great opportunity and we took advantage of that 2 hours because especially during football season, we could recap the NFL and all the great stories that happened
Mhm.
that day. And it's just an awesome opportunity and more obviously more compact than the 6 hours we had to plan out.
Well, not only that, if you compare us to local news, at least, and you had us for 2 hours, local news, even in its better days, was 3 to 4 minutes generally at the end of the show, anyways. And
Yeah.
with me, I was always determined to get everything I can to make sure, at that time I was doing a lot of producing, and I did go on the air when I needed to go on. I think we both ended up because not everybody can show up every week, so you're thrust into a situation where you have to take charge of the mic. And I enjoyed doing that as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
But that 9/11 show was a good show. I wouldn't do a show now 9/11, although if I did, it would be asking guests to come on. But I've done Sunday shows lately, and you need a day just to kind of relax a little bit. Back then, you didn't think about it. Remember,
Yeah.
we're in a different situation where we have to make every show count. Is what we have to do, and so that we can get our tape and all, and people can see us to get discovered. But
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the other things I liked about that show is the fact that we came up with the experts in different areas, different fields of sports.
right,
And that was very creative on our part too. To Dick Vitale, for example. Dick Vitale, he talked
right.
basketball with us before he was a big shot. You know,
Well, you know what was interesting about Dickie V? Here you and I, okay, when he was with the Detroit Titans, if I remember correctly,
yeah,
and you know what? He preceded us. So it was always good to see Dickie V every time we went in there. A lot of people didn't realize that, but yeah, I've seen him in Sarasota, which is where he lives, and he's a big representative of the V Foundation for Cancer
oh
Research.
yes, yeah,
And I would never buy memorabilia with autographs, but when I've gone out to Sarasota and bought a couple of his things, I did it because it was for cancer, and as long as Vital was a part of it, I was all part of that. And he thanked me for doing that.
that's great.
I
Yeah,
don't buy memorabilia. I have ways to get it. Obviously the
yeah.
things that were provided for, which leads me to my next thing. Team actually furnished us with press releases, media guys, but now everything is online. You know how I knew about that was when the Jacksonville Jaguars, I covered the draft for them a few years back. Everything's online. You don't have a big paper trail there, but when I was covering the Lions on draft, as well as covering a lot of the games, we had it all in front of us. All I had to do was just go out there and highlight it. And I'll tell you one thing, my time with the NFL was unbelievable because, I would get to the games 3 or 4 hours early, and I would go. For me, it's an 8 to 10 hour day. And you're saying, why do you get there that early? Because you know what? By the time that kickoff starts, I know every darn thing that there is about the game, and I have to worry about nothing. The story will be written a lot easier, knowing I'm totally prepared. And of
Right.
course, at that time, when I started covering the Lions, they lifted their policy of just bringing somebody into a room, and we got to go in and talk to the locker room. But the 2 or 3 of my favorite people at the Lions include Mike Murray and Bill Keenis, two people that I can't thank enough. And James Petralco was part of that mix, and Barbara, I don't remember what her last name was, but
Yeah. Yeah.
but if she's listening, Barbie, I'm thinking about you. But I enjoyed, Mike Murray's the one I believe who went out there and enabled us to get in the locker room. It was unbelievable, knowing that you understand the cool down time. Most times you really never understood that, but I don't like to talk to coaches after the game because these guys are so emotionally brought into preparing, but everything was provided for us. We had
Oh
media
yeah.
guides,
Yeah.
press
Yeah.
releases, and all that. But now it's
It
all
was,
online.
yeah, all those things, like you said, the paper type of things. But you mentioned about the Lions, and don't forget, I mean, how many times does this happen? Not too often. But back in the day, William Clay Ford, the owner of the team, he'd come in there, and even when the doors opened for us to get in there, he would take the time to talk to a little group of us. And what a thrill that was. I mean, a thrill. I mean, I'm trying to be objective here, but you don't see that very often. I mean, if Sheila of the Lions, for example, comes in, she gets out before the media come in. But not in those days. Bill Ford said no, and he would always have one or two jokes and crack. And I remember his laughter. But I'm just saying that I can remember that
Well,
at the
well, I talked to
Silverdome.
him too. He was really nice to me. It didn't matter whether
Yeah,
you're young or older. Gary treated everybody right. And the name I'm looking for is Barb Saliba, I believe.
that's it. Yes. Yep.
So once I got that in my head, I'm getting you out there, Barb Saliba. We got along great. Her and I just, she was
Yep.
like a crazy sister to me, but she always made sure I had whatever I needed. So
Yes. And then yeah. And then later on, of course, Deanna Caldwell helped us out so much at the Silverdome and Ford Field. Yeah.
yeah, I tell you what, though, I know Ford Field's a beautiful facility, but I tell you, I always call the Silverdome my second home. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
You
I,
did.
I, I
Yes.
love the Silverdome. I was in Oakland County, wasn't too far away, but what they've done downtown is unbelievable. So as we talk about old school media and we talk about the relationships, they were really real with these PR people, but it's a different animal now. Trying to get the new age PR people to send you an email back is like pulling teeth. But I ended up developing a lot of good relationships with them, and I know you did too throughout the Metro Detroit area. That
Yeah.
many of them have become friends, and I'm very grateful to those. But what are your thoughts about the relationships? I know you also have Detroit Sports Media Association, which has certainly helped bridge the gap a little bit between both.
Yeah, yeah, and you're right, Scott. The important thing is to build that relationship. Excuse me. And the important thing is, follow up. Follow up. If you ask for something or a commitment you make, follow up.
Right. Yeah, nowadays it's a different animal. But a lot of the people I know when you sent credential requests, I don't know if you did it by faxes. I think at the time you were doing it until email became more prevalent, but they were
Yes, yeah,
good.
yeah.
And
And yeah, that's back, like you said, old school again. You had to use a fax machine, but before the advent of email. But yeah, I mean, the thing is that when you think about it, those PR people are pulled in so many different directions. So
mhm.
it's all you got to just make your case and follow up with them.
Yeah, and the thing is Mike Murray gave us a season pass. I said I'm keeping it to myself. You want to get in here, then you got to get your own. And
Yep.
you didn't have any choice. I wasn't giving mine up. He says,
Right.
I'll give you a season pass because you show up every game. You don't need to call in anymore. And they did. And I
Yes.
know no disrespect towards you at all, but I was determined to make the Silverdome my Sunday home. And furthermore, I love going to the draft and we have more paper. I wonder how many of those trees you can you can get all that paper with. But I love the NFL draft with the Lions. You talk about a food fest, and then all the access I have with this, it was just unbelievable. It really,
Yeah.
really
Yep.
was. So now let's transition over to new school media. And one of my favorite lines here about new school media is it reminds me of silly putty, like as in a content creator form. Now, people are asking me, what do you mean by silly putty? Oh, you know what? If I don't like this, like silly putty, I'll remake it. Right? You
Yeah,
understand the analogy? So, okay, I didn't like this design, all that business, right? So I'll just do it again, do it
yeah,
again, do it again.
yeah.
And but I'll
Well,
tell you
yeah.
what.
Go ahead. Yeah,
No, no, that's okay. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah, it's silly putty. It's a good analogy, you know. And the thing is that sometimes we're able to do it again. And when you're live, you're not able to do it again per se, but now it's more common in the fact that, when you do a stand-up report or something like that,
Right.
it's going to be placed on, tape. It's going to be recorded and that sort of thing. So sometimes there are options to do a whole take all over again when you make a major mistake, but hopefully you don't do that too often.
Well, silly putty is what it is. But when you're producing shows together, which you are, you know what I mean, then it's okay to come up with different ideas and then be able to think
Yep,
on your feet. Because this is the one business that is not forgiving. If you can't think on your feet, you're in real trouble. You really, really are. And I think that's the one thing I tell people all the time. You know, there's no way to fake it in this
that's right.
business.
That's right.
And if you think you can, good luck. But I guess when you look at new school media, we're talking about the digital publications. I started my own, the South Florida Tribune, from scratch when I had the idea in my mind. No, let's face it, newspapers are no longer going to be around, or a lot of them are going out of business. But you never had to worry about anybody cutting your story because of space. And that's
Right.
how the South Florida Tribune became how I began this journey back into it. But there's far more opportunities now with your voice as a result of podcasts. So people can hear you anywhere. It's like 2 million of them. And not only that, George, there's tons of audio providers, YouTube, and all kinds of social media to promote. But when we started, okay, the stations went out there and promoted it for us. So all we had to do is get the content right. It had to be good, or we were going to
Yeah.
hear from our station directors that no, this
Oh,
doesn't
yeah.
quite work. Tell
Yeah.
tell everybody what it was like about the heat that we had to go ahead and deal with these people.
Well, yeah, I mean, you nailed it when you said that because if you came back or you phoned in a report or there's some element that you didn't get, oh my God, or if you didn't get it right, they listened to it or they heard it on another station. And well, where were you at the time, George? You were in that locker room. Why didn't you have this story? I
Right,
mean, there's always a lot of pressure that way because the other guy, the other paper, the other station is getting it and you're not. So there's a lot of important information and details you got to have your ears open to. So those other people that are listening, and then like you just said, I mean, you'll get heat from your own director, your sports program
yeah,
director, whoever it is that you're dealing with on the station or on the radio or television side too. I mean, yeah, you got to make sure you have that story that the other fellas and ladies had. It's not always easy because you might have a deadline that's a little bit different than their deadline. You may have to walk out or leave an interview maybe before this person said something,
right.
but you always got to make sure you're at the top of your game, man. You got to get those stories and this, and that was so competitive. It still is. It still is in new media, but especially it was even more so, I believe, back in the day.
Well, sure. I mean, let's face it. If I did something wrong or I wasn't on top of my game, even though I've always tried to be, I'll listen to the sports directors. They're the ones, obviously, I'm trying to impress to get more and more opportunities
Sure.
to land a bigger position. But I didn't mind that. But let's face it, as Ernie Harwell once said, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. I wouldn't leave the kitchen that fast.
Yeah.
But I had another guy many years ago. His name is Andy Lascano. I think he's in Corpus Christi now doing what he's doing right now is troubleshooting, the investigative reporter. He got out of sports,
Sure.
which is a
Sure.
good thing that I tell people. And he always taught me you got to be different. That's all there's.
Oh
If you're
yeah.
different, you're fine. If you're not, then you're going to be like the rest of them. And that's the biggest thing that I've learned about doing that. But yeah, no, you and I and everybody else that worked at the station, we took it on the chin when it wasn't right. And I didn't mind it though, because I'd rather get it right that way. Nowadays, there's
Oh,
very, no regulation with this stuff.
oh, absolutely. You wanted the story to be right. You wanted to be first, and the breaking news is overused nowadays. Breaking news,
Right.
But back then, we knew what was a good story, and we knew how to get it and get it to our back to our station or our newspaper.
The one guy that I mentioned in my book, Lessons from the Microphone, I really, too bad I never met him, but he didn't live that long. His name was Frank Reynolds. And during the Reagan assassination attempt, the biggest thing he said was, I don't want it first, I want it right. And when people go ahead, and I mentioned that in my book because that's what this is all about. We're not here to, some of his people made some mistakes and he hammered them on the air. He didn't single them out by names, but he just sending a message that, hey, you know what, this is, if they want to mess it up on their end, do it, but we're not doing it. And I'll tell you one thing, though, when you have a guy like Frank Reynolds who did ABC News Nightline and the Iran crisis and a lot of different things like that, Frank to me was as hard nosed a reporter as you can get. And I'll never forget the time when I was in the DC area that I went over to Arlington Cemetery and I definitely went by Frank Reynolds' gravesite and I said, "Thanks, Frank, for making me smarter because of your bold nature of talking like that on live television." And
Oh, I'll never forget that. Like you said, that scene, one of the, as a journalist, we'll never forget that when he took and turned his head and said, you know, they told me, his colleagues told him that Brady had died. The press secretary
right,
Brady had died. I mean, it was unbelievable. And he
right,
was just so, but he had that composure, like you said, and he had the sense to say, we got to get this right, fellas. And
yeah,
yeah, I mean, oh, I'll never forget that either, Scott. That was a great bit of journalism. Sad day, of course, but it was a great
right.
journalism. Yeah. Frank Reynolds was the best. Yeah.
Yeah, he was. Well,
Yeah.
amazingly though, you mentored me quite a bit when I got going in this business, but now we've come to a point where there's a bit of reverse mentoring where you're transitioning to podcasting, social media, etc. So, I've been hard on you a little bit too because this is a different animal. And the
Yeah.
reason
Yeah.
why is you have to do a lot more of the marketing on your own. But, what do you think of podcasting itself? I asked Mike Massaro on last week's edition of the Motor City Mad Mouse show, what's the ideal time for a podcast? It could be 15 minutes, could be 2 hours. Somebody wants to take a long drive, you got good material, they'll go through it all, or 15 minutes. So, but tell me your perception of of the word podcast and what it means to you.
Well, yeah, it's something that was obviously new to me. I mean, kind of out of the blue a little bit. But the fact of the matter is that what we have seen is just so many different people from so many different backgrounds have caught on with podcasting. So now you're in a situation where there's so many options for people to choose from and so many different niches. So for example, if we wanted to have a show like we did, remember on Sunday, was just talking about basketball, basket
Right,
bros. That was for that audience. And now you've got a show on another station I know that talks about baseball. But there's so many different ones that are out there that you've got to still remember that it is a new media. It is still in its learning stage to some. And you really got to make sure that the way I look at it, Scott, is that you're on there, but you still got to be a good journalist. And I know there's guys out there and ladies that just are, homers for a team that they love. And I get that. That's fine. But for those of us that want to still maintain, like you said, the magazine style, the things we learned as journalists growing up and carry those over into the podcast, I think it makes it much more better and much more uh, viewing and listening to it's a better option for somebody like me because I grew up like you did in journalism.
right.
Now, like I said, there's still room for the other people. Some people just want to be loud, bombastic, or support their team and make fun of every referee or every umpire's call and all that. Fine. I'm not one of those. But I will say this, you got to still maintain some objectivity. And I know that you do also, as well as me and the other guests on your show.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I'm a journalist first.
Right.
And I've had debates. Would you want to be a journalist or celebrity? Forget the celebrity business. I don't even care about that. Don't even
Yeah.
care. I'm a journalist. I'm hardcore, and that's all there is to it. Why? I believe there's a lot of power in the written word, is what there is, and I think that's what I say about Marshall McLuhan. The medium is the message is something that people should take it to. If you don't know who Marshall McLuhan is, folks, I would suggest that you go on Google and look him up if you're interested in journalism because he'll teach you a lot. But yeah, podcasting's interesting. I don't mind doing it. I am more I'm the producer and the talent at the same time. But I enjoyed getting learning from a lot of the people above me as well. Don't think that every once in a while I wouldn't mind having somebody. What do you think we could have done differently? Although I do encourage that on a lot of our post game or post show stuff as well. So
And you do a great job with that because yeah, that's so
thank you.
very important for you to, talk to us if we're a guest, etc. How do you think things went? What could we have improved
Right,
upon? How do things go? I mean, you're very good at that, and you're right. It has been a learning curve for me, and I do appreciate the kind of reverse mentoring we're going through right now, Scott,
right,
because you and your wife and other people that you become, attached to, including the great late Peter Ween. You've
right.
you've absorbed so much, and now you're sharing that with people like me. That's a real old school guy, and
Right.
other people that you've come to have on as guests, and that. So I think it's a very important thing, and you've done a really good job, both you and your wife, on and the other members of your team that you have on your other shows.
Right. Well, you know what? I'm glad you brought Peter Ween up. I'll tell you the biggest thing Peter did for me was, we went from obviously what they call nowadays terrestrial radio, okay,
Yeah,
now to the first time I've seen exposure on a camera. Okay, but I ended up going to internet radio. Peter and I, we drew some great numbers. But you know what he did? One best thing about this guy, he said, "You know what? It's your show. I'm just going along for the ride." And before he died, though, he once told me, he said, "I love what you've done. How you forced yourself to learn about technology." Is what he told me. And so,
yeah,
well,
yeah,
Peter, you're the greatest, one of the greatest people I've ever worked with because you take my wild behavior and he said, "No, I love watching. You're just entertaining." I'm not.
yeah.
I'll be honest with you. I'm not very good at taking compliments because I always feel I can do better, and I'll never be good at totally taking compliments because you're only as good as the people you have around you. But again, if other people see what you're doing, then I'm certainly not going to be to a point where I don't have confidence. But this is, what we do, especially when you've been in the industry as long, is you take the Barry Sanders approach. When you run in the end zone, hand the ball to the official and don't look like it's your first time. All these celebrations, I don't even care.
Yeah,
What we do, George, when we've been at it a while, is this is an expectation for us to do well. And if we don't do well or don't think we're feeling up to it, don't even go on. Just don't do it. But I
right.
view what we do as an expectation. And
Yes, exactly. And the other thing about podcasts too is that you got to keep things moving. You can't just and you are good at that and keeping moving on to the next subjects, moving on to the next questions or the next discussion, whatever it is. Because people limited time,
right.
limited learning. I mean, all these things, of course, the younger generation, they want things done and they want it quick. And podcasting, I think, can help achieve that too, provided you got the right host and the right direction of that
Well,
show.
Well, people have to be conscious when you're in the podcast industry that you have to focus on attention spans is what you have to do,
Yes,
and
yes,
and we never had to deal with that. People were either going to listen to us or they weren't going to listen to us. In most cases, as long as the shows were in the right time, then we never really worried about a lot of that stuff. But nowadays, you have to do it. But I can tell you right now, when I went to an event called Podcast Movement, there's no rhyme and reason to promote. Everything is trial and error, excuse me, and then you find the talent with the big followers, and of course nowadays hashtags are necessary to try to get some things. But I've learned a lot about the hashtags, but trial and error,
yeah,
George. You know, right when you think you got it solved, you don't have it solved, and I think
yeah,
that's the one
yeah.
thing we're both having to deal with.
Absolutely. Yeah. You got to be ready for what do they say? Plan B, phase two, whatever, trial and error. I mean, you just got to move on, but you got to learn from that past experience, what you did and how you can make it better.
The amazing part about it is the way you figure out trial and error and thinking on your feet. Really how you can justify all that is cover a spring training game. You think your top choice is not available, you didn't travel with the team, you better either have good friends that'll get you what you need, or better be able to think on your feet and find somebody on the fly because nobody's going to sit there and want to think that they went somewhere and got nothing done. There's no worse
Absolutely.
feeling than that for sure. But folks, trial and error is what it's all about. And that's one of the things I mentioned in the book as well. I have to make a confession though that I actually still use broadcast over podcast. I do because to me, anytime you're on the air, I've always looked at it as a broadcast. But podcast, it doesn't matter. You're still communicating a message.
Yeah.
What do you think about that comparison?
I think it's a good comparison. It is a message that we're sharing with other people watching, people listening. It's a tremendous opportunity. I mean, there's so much more available time to do podcasting and that sort of thing. So, the numbers is very important. You want to have an audience, you want to draw as many people as you can. And I know it's totally different than drawing listeners or viewers on radio or television, but no, it's still very important. I think podcasting is here to stay. I like the direction I see for most of them, but there's always room for improvement, like we said. But you still got to be knowledgeable about your subject matter. You want to be a subject matter expert on that event or that topic, whatever that you're talking about on that podcast. And that's so very important. Like you said, plan B, be ready for something that might not go right at that spring training game and be ready to talk to a backup catcher, a young kid I remember named Jake Rogers, who you were prepared to talk to. And nowadays he's an everyday player here in Detroit. But those kind of stories that I remember you did, it just really were great. And they, and you just have to be ready for the next thing. Try to anticipate more of what's going to happen next.
Well, obviously we know that podcasts get great exposure, but you know what? I'm glad you brought Jake Rogers up. The guy I give a lot of credit to for the Detroit Tigers. He's working there. Good to see him again. Was a guy by the name of Chad Crunk. And I said, listen,
Yeah,
Chad, this is what you talk about. Know who your friends are, in the organization. Chad and I got along all right. No big deal. They're there to help you out because it's free advertising for them. So, all right, Chad, who you got today? Go in there and figure it out. Come back to me. I think you should talk to this guy, or you should talk to this guy. And when we joked around about it over at Comerica Parks, yeah, I loved your recommendations. And, we kind of smiled, got a kick out of it. Said, no problem. It's my job. But, I told Chad, I don't need the big names. If they happen to fall in my lap, I'm all fine with it. But,
yeah,
I like to get those hidden gems, is what I like to do. So that way, when they're in the big leagues 2, 3, 4 years later, that's fine. But I also got that prospect training, though, when I went out there and covered the Fort Lauderdale Yankees is what I did. So I understood things over at the Class A level, and I was able to grow up there. Another mentor that I certainly want to mention on the show tonight is Tony DeMarco. Tony DeMarco obviously is the guy who taught me how to write, is what he ended up doing, and he always critiqued my stories, which is really kind of neat. And Tony's always been a lifelong friend, and there's no way I could do the show with you without mentioning Tony DeMarco. But the hidden gems is what I look. And I have another guy named Louis Durante here with the Miami Marlins, who's a big help, and I'm looking forward to working with him a lot more. And he was able to get me a guy. Trying to remember the Marlins guy, Dane Myers. There we go.
yeah,
And Dane's a great kid. But
yeah.
again, you got to know who your friends are with these teams, and they're going to do what they have to do. It's becoming more and more difficult to get clubhouse access. Thank COVID-19 for that. That had a lot to do with it too.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
So now you have to find a way to make the most. But I think the one thing about the new media, which has been great, is the emergence of videos. How you can get remote videos, put them on the YouTube channel. And I know the South Florida Tribune YouTube channel is a big tool that we use, and it's worked out well with a lot of what we've tried to accomplish. That's for sure. So
yeah,
I think when you put it all in perspective, you have to know what tools are in your box and use them. So, for example, one of the things one of the things that I lead toward is online networking. What I do is I use LinkedIn to get guests. And I'll tell you, there's nothing better than LinkedIn to get guests because they're all professionals and they're there for that particular purpose. If you think you're going to drive the numbers up on your shows on LinkedIn, don't hold your breath, but the contacts are priceless.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
Twitter and Facebook, I can find talent and a viewership on both of those. And I think you're able to realize that as you continue to watch what I'm doing and you're a part of all these shows, and it gives you an opportunity to promote your book. I can't get into that now. At least we know that there's people love to promote their books on these as well.
Sure.
But
Absolutely.
what are your thoughts about LinkedIn?
Oh, LinkedIn has been a great experience for me. I really do enjoy it. You're right. You get to see so many different people and so many different backgrounds. And for me it's important too because I can reconnect with a lot of people from my
Right,
past associations with the Detroit sports broadcast community or the newspaper guys in Detroit or wherever or other occupations I've had over the years. But yeah, it's very good, it's professional, and it tells you the story of their history too, which I like if they use it and keep it up properly. And you could see where somebody has gone in their career, for example, what kind of knowledge they've gained.
right.
I look back at that and I look up that stuff all the time. I mean, it's a great tool, like you said.
Well, it's an online resume too. Everybody knows that
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know your background. I've talked to some people that I couldn't put any more. I had didn't have room for it. So, okay, I mean, I took that comment like maybe you don't want to have any more because people will think you have an unstable job history. But I'm not going to mention any names on this particular show because this show here tonight is designed to give everybody an idea of what I've written in the book, but you're only getting just a little sample size of what has been in this particular book, which Lessons from the Microphone, where you can get it on Amazon Kindle as well as Barnes and Noble, and we have other providers as well. So, but that this is what we have as a sample size, and I know that there's a lot of other things. I'm actually planning to write a sequel to this probably by the end of the year. For me, I'm gonna write it hopefully this winter and do a little preliminary outlining during the summer. I got to tell you though, I brought a lady off of Instagram. I only got one guest off of Instagram, but she's the best. I swear. She bailed me out during the Super Bowl when I needed 15-minute segment to talk about the Super Bowl, and her name is Deb Whitcos. Okay, you want to talk about a woman that has so much. You talk about a sparky personality, high energy. There's nothing not to like about this woman. There just isn't. Now, what I need to find out from Deb, because she's been giving me a lot of these lately, and I'll get her on the phone so she can set the record straight as much as she's capable of doing with me. I'm trying to figure out this real stuff. I didn't know anything about memes for a while, and everybody's looking at me. Well, I'm just telling you the truth. But Deb is great. So what we've been talking a lot lately, and I had her on the show talking about women in sports, and she was absolutely fantastic. This woman. So we were talking about my book, and she actually went out there and did one of these real things for me and set it up. It was pretty cool. Well, I'll be sending her one pretty quickly. So what I've decided to do with her is right now she said I always wanted to do an audio book. Well, you know what? If everything goes according to plan, Deb Whitcast will be doing the audio book for Lessons from the Microphone Part 2. And I still feel that Lessons from the Microphone, the first part is 206 pages. My goal in 15, 16 chapters, I'm hoping to shave that down a little bit to maybe 10 chapters. I think we had over 40,000 some odd words. If I can cut it in half and just kind of clean up what I didn't put in the first time, then it'll be
yeah,
a good sequel and continuation. That's what I'm striving to
yeah.
do.
That's great. Yeah, that'll be nice.
Yeah, I mean, the industry is changing, so you can get away with a sequel here. But again, I'm not going to just write it for the sake of doing it. I don't care if the thing's 5 to 7, 8 chapters if that's all I've got left.
Right. No, you got a lot of material. You've accumulated a lot, and your storytelling is so important to parlay that to others so that we can all enjoy it and also take advantage of some of the tips and techniques that you have described. Yes.
Well, you'd be surprised how you can develop your personality a bit just by watching actors and actresses do movies as well as television. I'll mention a couple that stand out. Hoosiers was always great for me. The Rocky series was pretty good.
Yeah.
But one of the ones that's recently emerged is NCIS, and Mark Harmon does an unbelievable job portraying his character. He really does. I think my favorite one on Hoosiers undoubtedly is Gene Hackman, and I could get into some of his analogies, but I won't do that. I want people to have an opportunity to read it. But Gene Hackman is, I think, the greatest actor that ever lived. And I'll even have a little piece in there about Carl Weathers, who was portrayed as Rocky Balboa's competitor nemesis, is what he was,
Yes.
Apollo Creed, and it's
Yeah.
a pretty good line. But when you take some of these individuals, even though I view it as fiction at times, George, the reality of the situation is you can take a fictional character, okay, and then you can behaviors are behaviors. I don't care what anybody
Yeah.
says.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fiction. It doesn't have. So what? Who cares?
Right. Right.
Nobody cares. You know,
Yeah.
but the one thing I'm going to say about new media, which I've seen a lot more of, tell me if you feel the same way, is I've never seen more fake news in my life knowing I'm seeing it online. I understand there many years ago you had the National Enquirer, which was a different kind of paper, but people knew what you were getting with it. But now that you have the digital platform, it's opened up to so many different people. Fake news is something that gets frowned upon in our industry. And as far as we're concerned, you just can't do it if you have any
Right.
ethics or standards of what you're doing.
Absolutely. I mean, and that is a concern right now. Fake news, and even what's going to happen with artificial intelligence and people coming up with different things, and like you said, we're checking facts. We got to have some fact checking going on constantly. Even in our politics and stuff like that, which we won't get into. But I mean, there's so many things, and that to me is a warning sign. Fake news, because no, you and I, like we already discussed, we had a career in journalism. We built our strong skills and our platform, if you will, on high standards and journalistic standards. So fake news, I don't want any part of that. I'm sorry, I don't. I don't.
Well, amazingly enough, I'm starting to notice if I see on Instagram some insane stories that I don't think would happen, I only have three or four reliable sources in sports that I'll actually look at. And obviously, we know ESPN is very reliable. I got no issue with that.
Yeah.
They've been in the sports business for who knows how long, a long, long time. But, and then you got the score, then you have Yahoo Sports, CBS Sports, as well as those are the ones that I go to the most: CBS, Yahoo, ESPN. But I think when we look at a lot of other things and you look at the role models you had, especially in this industry, I had one guy who I think so much of, and I was fortunate enough to meet him before he retired, was Bob Lee of ESPN. If he doesn't set the standard high, in my opinion, then I don't know who does.
Oh yeah, yeah, Bob, what a great guy. What a great knowledge of the sports world he had and all that. And Dick Schaap was another one. I always admired the work of Dick Schaap, the late Dick Schaap. And it just there's so many great people in that ESPN family that started things out. But Bob is right at the top of the list, Scott. I agree with you on that one.
Well, when you talk about, I mean, if you now a lot of people may not know him nationally, but I've gotten to know him real well. One of my favorite people out there is Bob Ryan of the Boston Globe.
Oh yes.
I've
Yes.
gotten to know Bob real well, and one of the nicest people on the planet. And he's always helpful to try to give you advice if you ever need it too.
Oh, absolutely. I remember Larry Whiteside too. What a great basketball writer Larry Whiteside, and the late Larry Donald here in Troy, Michigan, who had a newspaper, Basketball Times, with his wife. And there have been some great other writers, as we know, Mike Downey and Shelby Struther
Right.
and Brian Burwell. We've lost so many good guys but they came through Detroit. A lot of us got the chance to meet and know them, again, they're good journalists. They're good journalists. So sports writing is fun, but it also has a side to it that has to be uh, integrity, and that's important for all of us.
Well, Lynn Hanning, I mentioned earlier, Joe Falls is unbelievable. I love Joe.
Our
I,
friend Jerry Green. I mean, what a great
yeah.
career Jerry had, and I got along really good with George Puskas when he was at the Free Press too. And so there's a lot of great, but they make themselves great because they do the thoroughness, they do the fact checking, and they want to make sure that they got the story right, not just some hearsay stuff. So that's very important nowadays, as it always has been.
Well, Tom Gage is another class act too.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
but I'm not going to list up 9 million
no,
Detroit people, but Tom Gage, Lynn Henning, you know, and of course Joe Falls was always one of my favorite people, and to this day I always viewed him as yet another mentor as well. But I think that's a key, folks. As long as you have a good mentor that's guiding you the right way,
hmm
and
yeah,
and I don't know, and again, this is just pure speculation and conversation, whether a lot of this new generation understands how valuable it is to have have a mentor out there, and I think that to me that's so vitally important to have mentors
definitely.
out there.
Yep, I agree. It is important.
Yeah, because I think old time values have really been lost. I know we've covered an awful lot of ground here on the
Yeah,
Motor City Mad Mouse show, and I can tell you right now we could talk about this subject all day long. There might be times when I'll
okay.
bring out other things to talk about at a later date, but just kind of get your foot wet a little bit when you talk about the FCC to to now, you can say pretty much what you want, but
Yeah.
I think the only thing I worry about with new media sometimes is freedom of speech could get out of control pretty quickly.
Absolutely. It's a good way to put it, Scott. And you got to be careful about that because there's certain things you got to just rein in and make sure that you're doing things right. And there's so many people, obviously, on the air or on podcasting now that don't really do that. So we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, we will. So, meanwhile, I want to thank everybody for joining us here on this edition of the Motor City Mad Mouth Show. My name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Mad Mouth, and I have tonight George Eichorn, who has been with me in this journey for decades plus. And I guess I don't know. I guess I'll know when the time comes when I'm ready to retire, whether there's a few things left to do, but I'm not in any hurry to do it. Now, at this point in time, I was talking to my Hall of Fame friend Dan Edwards, who to me got inducted in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He said, you know what, you can't cover everything. You'll know when you feel like it's right. And another great PR guy, Chip Namias, is certainly a guy that I wish I could carbon copy guys like Dan Edwards and Chip Namias as well. Because again, it's all about relationship building. But the main thing is content hunters, silly putty. I can give you any analogy that you want, but just get it right and believe in what you're doing and let everybody know that you're much different than anybody else or a lot of people, and that's called ethical. And I think nowadays ethics lacks in new school media. Although I'm not saying that there's a lot of people that don't have the ethics,
Right,
but
right.
but you've got to be able to write well in order to broadcast well. But meanwhile, I know I've been redundant on some of these points. I totally get it, but I hope that everybody out there will understand that there's a lot of things that you can learn from our industry and I'll tell you what, over the weekend, I'm looking forward to seeing a lot more of our colleagues. Dave Gorin will be hosting this event, National Sports Media Association. I'll be leaving on Friday night. Hope to be there in the Greensboro, North Carolina area and seeing some of my good friends as well. And of course, I want to mention this really quickly before we call it a night is I have a young student named Kate Aitchison. As long as and Kate says I only want to learn from you. So, oh God, what am I doing? Brainwashing you? No, I want to carbon copy you. I thought she was drinking some insane Kool Aid. No, we were kidding around about it. She's such a beautiful young up and coming journalist. But I think the thing she understands is nowadays, if you can accept coaching and hard coaching, it's one thing, and that's the key. Because I'll tell you one thing: in the FCC, if you didn't accept hard coaching, you were out the door.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And that's what it all comes down to with the FCC. So I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of people over the weekend and being back on here so I can tell you more about my story. So meanwhile, George, once again, thank you very much for being on the Motor City Man Mouth show. Old
Glad to
school
be on.
media versus new school media. Once again, for the last time tonight, that's my book. There'll be another one. Deb, hope I'm planning to have Debbie go out there and do the audio. So, on behalf of George Eichorn, my name is Scott Morgan, the Motor City Madmouth. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Motor City Madmouth, and we will catch you the next time. Good night, everybody.
Good night.